The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest navigable point. Through that 21-mile bottleneck passes approximately 20% of all the oil traded on the planet. A volume of maritime traffic so dense, so economically consequential, and so strategically irreplaceable that every naval power with interests in the Persian Gulf has spent decades thinking about what it would mean to control it, disrupt it, or defend it. The geometry of the strait forces every vessel that transits it, warship, tanker, container carrier, or fishing boat, into a constrained channel where the options for maneuver are limited by shallow water on both sides and by the traffic density that turns deviation from the lane into a navigational hazard. A guided missile destroyer transiting the Strait of Hormuz is not in open ocean. It is in a corridor, and corridors have walls. The walls of the Strait of Hormuz are Iranian territory on the northern side and Omani territory on the southern side, and the water between them has been, for as long as the U.S. Navy has operated in the region, one of the most thoroughly surveilled and most tactically constrained operating environments in the world. Every transit is planned. Every transit is tracked. Every transit is conducted with the awareness that the geometry reduces tactical options in ways that open ocean operations do not, and that an adversary who understands that geometry well enough can design a strike around the constraints rather than against them. The adversary who designed what happened on a Sunday morning understood the geometry exceptionally well. The MV Hormuz Meridian was registered in Panama, crewed by nationals of 4 different countries, and operated under a commercial charter arrangement that identified it as an oceanographic survey vessel conducting seabed mapping operations in the Gulf of Oman and the lower Strait of Hormuz. It had been in the area for 31 days. It had the equipment profile of a legitimate survey operation: hull-mounted acoustic transducers, towed sensor arrays, positioning antenna arrays, and the kind of data processing infrastructure that oceanographic work required. It had filed its operational notifications with the maritime authorities of Oman and the UAE in accordance with standard practice. It had responded to every hailing communication from passing naval vessels with appropriate identification and a professional explanation of its survey activities. It had also, for 31 days, been operating as the most sophisticated covert radar relay station the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy had ever deployed in a contested maritime environment. The concept behind what the IRGC operational planners designated as Operation Blind Corridor had been under development for 6 years. Its foundational premise was a solution to a problem that had constrained Iranian anti-ship missile doctrine for decades: the curvature of the Earth. Shore-based anti-ship cruise missiles fired from the Iranian coastline into the Strait of Hormuz or the Gulf of Oman face a fundamental geometric problem. Their radar seekers, operating at sea level, cannot acquire a target that is below the radar horizon. And a target vessel in the lower strait or the northern Gulf of Oman is below the radar horizon of a shore-based battery for most of its transit, until it is within a range that gives the defending ship's countermeasures and intercept systems the maximum possible engagement time. The missiles can fly the distance. They cannot see the target from behind the horizon curve until the geometry closes. And by the time the geometry closes, the defending ship has had warning. The solution the Iranian engineers had developed was to remove the horizon problem entirely by placing the radar sensor above the horizon. Not by putting it in an aircraft or a satellite, which could be detected and engaged, but by putting it in a ship that was already in the operating area, a ship that was flying a neutral flag and had been there long enough that its presence was routine, a ship that carried, concealed inside its legitimate oceanographic survey equipment suite, a phased array radar system capable of providing continuous, over-the-horizon targeting data to shore-based anti-ship missile batteries via an encrypted satellite relay link. Data that would allow those batteries to compute and maintain firing solutions against vessels transiting the strait without ever activating their own radar systems in a way that would generate a detectable emission. A shore-based missile battery that never activates its own radar generates no warning signal. It generates no electronic emissions that a ship's passive sensor suite can detect and classify as a threat. It is, from the perspective of the targeted vessel, invisible until the moment the missile is in the air. And by then, in the geometry of the strait, the time from launch detection to impact can be measured in seconds rather than minutes. The Hormuz Meridian's concealed radar system had been installed during a maintenance period at a facility on the Iranian Keshem Island coast, conducted in a covered dock over a period of 11 days, 14 months before this Sunday. The installation had replaced the legitimate survey vessel's primary acoustic transducer bay with a system that used the transducer housing as a radome for the phased array antenna, a housing that, from the outside, was acoustically and visually indistinguishable from the survey equipment it replaced. The encryption key architecture resided on the shore-based relay server, meaning a physical inspection of the Hormuz Meridian would find no classified key material and nothing that differed from legitimate survey traffic. The crew was not entirely complicit. The master and 3 senior officers understood the vessel's true purpose. The remaining 14 crew members believed they were on a genuine survey operation. The senior officers had been recruited by IRGC Maritime Intelligence over 2 years from candidates identified through their financial circumstances and professional histories. The plan was direct. The Hormuz Meridian would feed continuous targeting data on a Burke-class destroyer, conducting a freedom of navigation transit, while 4 shore batteries on the Hormozgan coast, each carrying 6 modified anti-ship missiles, received that data and held firing solutions without ever activating their own sensors. At the narrowest section of the strait, all 4 batteries would fire simultaneously. 24 missiles from 4 azimuths within a 3-second window. 24 missiles from 4 directions in 3 seconds, with no radar emission warning, in a corridor 21 miles wide. The plan had one catastrophic vulnerability that its designers had not identified. Because the vulnerability existed not in the operational architecture, but in the assumption that the Hormuz Meridian had been in the operating area for 31 days without being noticed. It had been noticed on day 4. A signals intelligence collection platform operating in international airspace over the Gulf of Oman had detected, at 2:17 a.m. on the Hormuz Meridian's 4th day in the operating area, an encrypted satellite uplink burst from the vessel's communication system that was 14 milliseconds longer than any data transmission the vessel's legitimate survey operations would have required to generate at that point in its work cycle. 14 milliseconds. The automated flagging system rated it at a 9% confidence level and placed it in the secondary review queue. An analyst working the overnight shift reached it at 4:05 a.m. He ran a duration analysis against the vessel's legitimate survey data rate, the rate at which its actual sensor systems generated data and the rate at which that data needed to be uplinked for processing. The transmission had been 14 milliseconds longer than the survey data rate could account for. 14 milliseconds at the satellite link's data rate corresponded to approximately 47 kilobytes of additional data embedded in the transmission alongside the legitimate survey traffic. 47 kilobytes was not a large data packet. It was, however, precisely the size of a structured radar targeting data frame from a compact phased array system transmitting at the update rate required for anti-ship missile guidance. The analyst had seen this exact frame-size signature once before. He had seen it in a classified technical study of Iranian radar relay concepts that had been assessed as theoretical rather than operationally deployed. The study was 18 months old. He filed a Priority 1 report at 4:42 a.m. and requested the full signals collection history for the vessel. By 9 a.m., the picture was assembled. The Hormuz Meridian had been transmitting the anomalous data packet in every satellite uplink cycle since it arrived in the operating area. Consistently, at regular intervals, embedded in the legitimate survey traffic. The pattern was not consistent with any system malfunction or data corruption. It was consistent with a system that was operating continuously and generating structured output at a fixed update rate. The vessel was not a survey ship with a glitch. The vessel was a radar platform with a cover story. By 2 p.m. on the same day, the Office of Naval Intelligence had the assessment. High confidence that the Hormuz Meridian was operating as an Iranian covert radar relay platform targeting U.S. and allied naval assets transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The assessment included a probabilistic analysis of the operational geometry, which shore-based batteries could receive the relay data, and what their effective engagement envelope would be against a straight-transiting destroyer. The assessment identified 4 probable battery positions on the Hormuzgan coast based on historical collection and the relay data's directional characteristics. The decision made at 5th Fleet that afternoon was the decision that defined everything that followed. The Hormuz Meridian would not be boarded, not be warned off, and not be interfered with in any way that its operators could detect. It would continue to operate as though it had not been identified. The shore-based batteries it was feeding would continue to receive the data they believed was accurate targeting information. And the destroyer that was scheduled to conduct the Freedom of Navigation transit on Sunday would conduct that transit. But not from the position that the Hormuz Meridian's radar was going to report. The deception architecture built over the following 27 days was technically demanding in a way that required the cooperation of systems and commands that normally had no operational connection. The Hormuz Meridian's radar was tracking the destroyer based on its radar cross-section return, its position data, and its speed. Data the relay system was translating into a targeting picture for the shore batteries. To feed false data to the batteries without alerting the Hormuz Meridian's operators that anything had changed. The U.S. Navy needed to create a false radar target that the Hormuz Meridian's phased array system would acquire in place of the actual destroyer. A target convincing enough that the relay data it generated would produce firing solutions pointed at empty water rather than the ship. The system used to create that false target was an AN/SLQ-32 electronic warfare suite, operating in active decoy mode from a dedicated support vessel positioned in the strait 3 nautical miles ahead of the actual destroyer's transit track. The support vessel, a less valuable logistics ship, would present a radar cross-section profile calibrated to match the Burke-class destroyer's signature. The Hormuz Meridian's radar would acquire it. The relay would feed it to the shore batteries. The shore batteries would compute their firing solutions against the decoy vessel's position, and the actual destroyer would transit the strait 3 nautical miles behind, presenting a suppressed radar signature achieved through a combination of reduced emission posture and physical radar-absorbent material deployed on the ship's most reflective surfaces. The decoy vessel's crew was briefed on their role. They understood that the missiles, when they came, would be aimed at them. They also understood that the engagement architecture that had been built around them was designed to intercept every one of those missiles before any of them arrived. The briefing was not comfortable. The crew accepted it professionally. They were naval personnel. They understood the arithmetic. At 3:44 a.m. on the Sunday, the destroyer entered the southern approach to the Strait of Hormuz. 3 nautical miles ahead, the logistics support vessel was already in the Narrows, presenting its calibrated radar profile to the Hormuz Meridian's concealed antenna array. The Hormuz Meridian's relay was transmitting. The shore batteries were receiving. The firing solutions being computed on the Iranian coastal batteries were pointed at the decoy. At 4:02 a.m., the signals intelligence platform detected the shore battery command network go active, not the radar systems, which remained dark, but the fire control communication links that coordinated a simultaneous multi-battery launch. The burst transmission was brief. It was the pre-launch coordination signal. At 4:03 a.m., the Hormuz Meridian satellite uplink transmitted a targeting update to all 4 shore batteries simultaneously. A compressed update frame that the signals platform assessed as a final firing solution confirmation. The update was the trigger. 14 seconds later, 24 anti-ship cruise missiles were in the air from 4 separate positions on the Hormuz coast. The launches were detected by the space-based infrared sensor network at 4:03 a.m. and 19 seconds. The launch plumes from 4 separate positions, appearing simultaneously within a 2-second window, reached the processing threshold for positive launch classification at 4:03 a.m. and 31 seconds. The data reached the destroyer's Combat Information Center at 4:03 a.m. and 44 seconds. The destroyer was 3 nautical miles behind the decoy vessel. Its Aegis system had been in a preloaded engagement posture since 3 a.m. The engagement solutions for 24 missiles arriving from 4 separate azimuths in a compressed salvo had been computed, refined, and recomputed 11 times across the preceding 27 days. Every VLS cell assignment had been pre-authorized. The tactical action officer's role in the first 30 seconds of the engagement was not decision-making. It was confirmation. The SM-2 Block 3B and SM-6 launches from the destroyer began at 4:04 a.m. and 7 seconds. The Burke-class destroyers positioned as the outer intercept screen on both sides of the strait, held at their positions under emissions control for 6 hours, invisible to the Hormuz Meridian's radar because their own radar systems had been offline, activated their Aegis arrays simultaneously at 4:04 a.m. and 09 seconds, adding their intercept capacity to the engagement picture. 3 Aegis ships, 24 missiles. The mathematics had been computed 27 days ago, and the answer had been manageable with acceptable margin, if every system performed within specification. One system did not perform within specification. The forward VLS module on the lead destroyer suffered a cell pressurization fault at 4:04 a.m. and 22 seconds. A mechanical failure in the gas generator of Cell 7 that prevented the assigned SM-6 from launching. The fault alarm appeared on the weapons control console at the same moment the engagement was running at maximum tempo. The weapons control officer had 4 seconds to redirect the engagement solution from the failed cell to the next available cell while maintaining all other active engagement tracks. She made the redirect in 3.1 seconds. The replacement SM-6 launched from Cell 9 at 4:04 a.m. and 29 seconds, 7 seconds behind the original timeline for that track. 7 seconds behind timeline against a cruise missile moving at high subsonic speed is not a trivial margin. The track that Cell 7 had been assigned to was the fastest of the 4 Western azimuth missiles. A missile that had been targeted first, precisely because its arrival geometry placed it in the most constrained intercept window. The 7-second delay moved the intercept solution from a comfortable mid-range engagement to a terminal engagement. The SM-6 launched from Cell 9 caught the Western missile at 4:06 a.m. and 51 seconds at a range of 11 nautical miles from the decoy vessel. 11 nautical miles! The crew of the decoy vessel, maintaining their position and their calibrated radar profile in the narrowest section of the strait, tracked the intercept on their own display. The watch officer noted the range in the log without comment and continued monitoring the engagement. The remaining 23 missiles were engaged in sequence. The outer screen destroyers handled the northern and southern azimuth approaches with engagement geometries that had been pre-positioned specifically for those threat axes. The eastern approach, the smallest of the 4 batteries, with 5 missiles, was handled entirely by the lead destroyer's remaining SM-2 magazine. The engagement sequencing required the tactical action officer to manage 4 simultaneous intercept timelines. A failed VLS cell that had been isolated and its remaining loadout redistributed, and a radar picture that was updating faster than the engagement timeline allowed her to fully process without relying on the pre-computed solutions her team had spent 27 days refining. She relied on them. They were right. The final intercept of the engagement was logged at 4:08 a.m. and 34 seconds. 24 missiles in the air. 4 minutes and 15 seconds from first launch detection to last intercept. 23 clean intercepts in the mid-range and outer zones. 1 terminal intercept at 11 nautical miles from the decoy vessel. 0 impacts on any ship. 0 personnel casualties. At 4:09 a.m., the Hormuz Meridian's radar system detected that the vessel it had been tracking, the decoy, was altering course and reducing speed. The vessel's radar profile remained consistent with a Burke-class destroyer. The Hormuz Meridian's master transmitted a status update to the shore-based relay. At 4:11 a.m., the relay server received a response. The master read it. The response was not from the IRGC command network. The response was a system notification from the satellite carrier's network management system, informing the Hormuz Meridian's communication system that the encrypted relay channel it had been using for 31 days had been flagged by the carrier's security monitoring as inconsistent with the vessel's licensed oceanographic survey data profile and had been suspended pending investigation. The notification was automated. It was the product of a request submitted to the satellite carrier's security team by a regulatory authority 27 days earlier. A request that had been carefully timed to activate at 4:11 a.m. on this Sunday, after the engagement was complete and after the relay's continued operation would no longer provide any operational value to the Iranian command network. The Hormuz Meridian's encrypted relay link went dark at 4:11 a.m. and 33 seconds. At 4:15 a.m., the destroyer cleared the northern exit of the Strait of Hormuz and entered the Gulf of Oman. VLS Cell 7 remained inoperable. The magazine had been reduced to 63% of pre-transit loadout. 3 outer screen destroyers had expended between 40 and 50% of their SM-2 reserves. Logistics replenishment would be required within 72 hours. At 5:30 a.m., a joint boarding team from a U.S. Coast Guard law enforcement detachment and a Royal Navy visiting force unit, positioned in the Gulf of Oman since day 6 of the operation under a pre-coordinated authority framework, approached the Hormuz Meridian under the flag law enforcement provisions of the vessel's flag state agreement. The boarding was completed at 6:15 a.m. The concealed radar system was discovered within 40 minutes of the team entering the survey equipment bay. The master and 3 senior officers were detained. The remaining crew was secured pending investigation. The technical recovery of the phased array radar system and server logs from the Hormuz Meridian produced intelligence that the analysis teams would spend 3 months processing. A comprehensive picture of an Iranian covert maritime relay capability that had been assessed as theoretical and had been operational for at least 14 months. The shore-based batteries on the Hormuzgan coast were engaged by a pre-planned strike package at 5:45 a.m. A package authorized at 4:09 a.m., following confirmation that all 24 missiles had been neutralized. 4 F/A 18F Super Hornets from the carrier, which had been holding at altitude outside the strait's constrained geometry during the transit, executed the strike between 5:45 a.m. and 5:53 a.m. All 4 battery positions were rendered inoperable. The strike was conducted in daylight, at a time and from a direction that gave Iranian radar operators complete visibility of the approach. No attempt was made to conceal it. The concealment phase of the operation had ended at 4:03 a.m. What followed was meant to be seen. Now the accounting. 31 days of covert radar relay operations by the Hormuz Meridian. 24 anti-ship cruise missiles launched from 4 shore batteries simultaneously. 24 missiles aimed at a decoy vessel presenting a false radar profile. 23 missiles intercepted in mid-range and outer zones. 1 terminal intercept at 11 nautical miles following a VLS cell pressurization fault. 0 impacts on any vessel. 0 U.S. personnel casualties. 1 failed VLS cell at the worst possible moment. Managed in 3.1 seconds by a weapons control officer who had run this scenario 27 times in simulation. 4 Iranian shore battery positions rendered inoperable. 1 Hormuz Meridian boarded and its concealed radar system seized. 4 crew members detained. 1 satellite carrier security notification sent at exactly 4:11 a.m. One analyst who found a 14-millisecond transmission anomaly at 4:05 a.m. on day 4 and decided it was worth a priority 1 report. The Iranian architecture was built on a single assumption. The relay platform would remain undetected. The assumption failed not because the cover was imperfect, but because the collection posture operated at a granularity the Iranian planners had not credited as achievable. 14 milliseconds is not a margin most collection systems are built to find. The system that found it was built precisely for that boundary. Because someone, years before this Sunday, had understood that the space between detectable and undetectable would keep compressing and had built accordingly. The strait is 21 miles wide. The margin that mattered was 14 milliseconds. The destroyer emerged into the Gulf of Oman at dawn and resumed its patrol. The ocean marked nothing. It only keeps the record. The record stands.